Knights communicated through symbols and gestures hidden from enemies. Secret codes conveyed strategy and loyalty across battlefields and courts. Messages were disguised in armor, banners, and personal emblems. Deciphering these signals revealed alliances and warnings in plain sight, uncover their hidden language with medieval history. Dawn spilled a pale, fragile light across the frost-tinged training yard, where armored figures moved with the precision of ritual rather than haste. Each gauntleted hand brushed along the hilt of a sword, traced the curve of a shield, or adjusted the straps of plate armor. Gestures honed through repetition and necessity. The cold air carried the sharp stems of leather and steel, mingled with the acrid smoke curling from distant wood fires, while faint whiffs of metallic blood drifted from sparring practice. A quiet reminder of skill tested and mistakes. Punished horses shifted restlessly in the background, hooves scraping frozen earth, nostrils flaring as they mirrored the anticipation that pulsed through the men who rode them. Every movement was a message, a tilt of a shield, the subtle tap of a gauntlet against another, the nuanced angle of a banner, all carried meaning comprehensible only to those initiated into the intricate language of war. Words whispered in archaic dialects barely carried on the wind. Gestures woven seamlessly into drills, and the rhythm of armored footsteps formed a code invisible to outsiders. It was a symphony of secrecy, a choreography of survival, a current of intelligence flowing silently across the yard. Understanding the hidden signals of an ally could mean the difference between life and death, victory and ruin. The stables held their own quiet secrets. Straw pressed between hooves and walls absorbed sweat, mud, and the faint copper scent of blood, while iron fittings creaked under weight and stress scribes crouched near benches, copying patterns of signals into parchment scrolls sealed with wax. The ink still damp, each mark an unspoken promise that knowledge could be preserved, transmitted, and deciphered only by the worthy. Their quills scratched in rhythm with distant clangs of armor, creating a muted counterpoint to the neighing of horses and the shuffle of boots on frost-bound stone within these walls. The pulse of preparation throbbed like a heartbeat, quiet, relentless. Indispensable horses stamped in the yard, hooves striking frozen mud in measured cadence. Riders leaned low, whispering soft commands, fingers caressing reins with the intimacy of trust born from years of shared peril. The animals were partners in this silent communication, attuned to subtle shifts in posture, the almost imperceptible tilt of a rider's body, the flick of a gauntleted wrist. Together, they became instruments in a language of warning, opportunity, and strategy. Their restless energy mirrored the anticipation of the men they carried, the unspoken understanding that the battlefield could erupt without warning, that chaos would always seek to test the bonds of command and loyalty. Symbols etched into shields, banners, and crests deepened the network of secrecy. A fleur-de-lis here could signify allegiance, a subtle notch there a warning, a hidden emblem, a mark of loyalty only recognized by those who needed to know. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, history encoded into shape and line, a visual lexicon guiding knights and commanders in an era when a misread signal could topple empires. Even the wind seemed to honor these codes, lifting banners with purpose, twisting fabric to reveal angles and shapes that only trained eyes could read. while shadows stretched across stone walls, briefly revealing and concealing the silent language of men, steel, and strategy. The courtyard itself breathed in anticipation, the clatter of armor, the scrape of boot on cobblestone, the distant neigh of horses, and the occasional snort of oxen moving supplies outside the walls merged with the sigh of wind through battlements, creating a haunting chorus of vigilance and readiness. Every sound was part of the unspoken dialogue. Every echo could be interpreted, measured, and responded to. Men and animals alike moved in a web of trust, each aware that survival demanded more than brute strength or courage. It required comprehension, timing, and the instinct to act upon hidden knowledge. With precision, sparring knights tested each other with controlled strikes, the metallic clang of blades punctuating lessons in discipline and timing. Muscles coiled and released, armor shifted with effort, and breath steamed in the cold morning air. Each parry and thrust carried multiple meanings, a demonstration of technique, a rehearsal of unspoken signals, a subtle evaluation of skill and loyalty. The ground beneath boots and hooves held the memory of countless lessons, mistakes, and victories. An invisible archive inscribed not on parchment but in muscle memory and intuition. Every knight moved as if every gesture were both a lesson and a secret, a testament to the painstaking preparation required for the unpredictable theater of war. Ravens wheeled overhead, their black silhouettes cutting against the soft morning light. Their cries echoed through stone corridors, acting as both witness and messenger, a living counterpoint to the silent choreography below. To some, they were omens, shadows of death or misfortune. To others, they were neutral observers, indifferent chroniclers of human ingenuity and survival. The knights, absorbed in their coded movements, acknowledged the birds only in fleeting glances, understanding instinctively that every observer, seen or unseen, could influence the flow of information and the fortunes of those who wielded power on the field. As morning unfolded, the language of knights stretched beyond the walls of the training yard, reaching into stables, across courtyards, and into the open fields beyond. Each movement, each whispered command, each tilt of shield or angle of banner formed a web of connection, a hidden current that guided men, horses, and even banners alike. It was a fragile lattice of trust, cunning, and survival, where the failure to understand could spell catastrophe, and the mastery of subtlety could determine the rise or fall of kingdoms. In the cold light of dawn, the silent language became a living thing, linking human and animal, steel and shadow, symbol and gesture. Knights moved with intention, horses responded with instinct, and banners traced codes in the wind. A delicate choreography of readiness and restraint. This was more than training. It was survival encoded in motion, an unspoken understanding that in a world governed by danger, uncertainty, and ambition, knowledge was the sharpest blade, and trust the most essential armor. By mid-morning, the yard held the rhythm of life and preparation, a ballet of discipline and secrecy. Every step, every glance, every tilt of steel was a conversation, a negotiation, a reminder that survival depended not on sight alone, but on perception, intuition, and the careful reading of hidden currents. Shadows lengthened, banners fluttered, and the cold sun glinted off polished metal, illuminating a reality where the silent language of knights governed the flow of information, the rhythm of combat, and the fate of those who moved within its intricate webband. As the day advanced, the echoes of this hidden order stretched outward, beyond the walls and into the forests, rivers, and villages that depended upon strategy unseen, signals unreadable by enemies, and a discipline honed through generations in the quiet intersection of steel, leather, and instinct. Kingdoms endured, armies prepared, and life continued, guided by a secret current that whispered through frost, fire, and the vigilant eyes of men and animals who understood that survival required more than required comprehension, trust, and mastery of the silent language written in shadow and steel. Mist clung stubbornly to the stone ramparts, curling around armored knights like smoke drawn from some unseen fire. Each figure moved with a precision that was more ritual than practice, hands brushing against leather, sliding along hilts, adjusting straps and gauntlets with a care born of experience and fear. The air was sharp with cold, carrying the mingled scent of sweat, oiled leather, and the faint metallic tang of iron. Horses beneath their riders shifted nervously, nostrils flaring, ears flicking toward the sounds of movement, sensing the tension that threaded through every gesture, every tilt of a helm, every subtle shift of a foot. Every motion was a message, a step forward, a subtle angle of a shield, the tilt of a banner. Each communicated volumes to those trained to read the language of war in silence. Words, when whispered in archaic dialects, were carriers of meaning. But it was the invisible code gesture, pause, alignment that governed action and dictated survival, the clank of metal on stone, the soft scrape of sharpened blades, the muted sigh of armor adjusting under strain. All became part of a symphony composed to convey strategy without uttering a single clear phrase. Outsiders would see only drills. Yet each drill was alive with intent, each sequence a map of trust, warning, and commanding. The shadowed corners of the yard, scribes crouched over parchment, quills scratching furiously as they recorded the nuances of hand signals, shield tilts, and the motions of banners. Their work was meticulous. A missed angle, an overlooked pause, could unravel a strategy meant to sway the tide of battle. Each mark on paper was an attempt to capture the intangible, to preserve a knowledge that was more instinct than instruction, a living current of information flowing through steel, leather, and muscle memory. The scribes were witnesses to a world where survival depended as much on understanding unseen codes as it did on swords or arrow symbols etched into crests. Helms and tunics spoke their own quiet language, a curve of a line, a notch in a shield, an emblem painted in hidden detail. All carried warnings, secret orders, or marks of allegiance. They were legible only to the initiated, a clandestine lexicon layered upon the visible, merging artistry with necessity, superstition with strategy. Each symbol was a thread in a larger web of intelligence, binding men and animals, riders and steeds, banners and battlements into a single organism poised for the chaos of battle. Horses were participants in this silent code, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling, hooves shifting against frost-crusted ground. They mirrored the subtle tension of their riders. The bond between man and animal was almost tactile, an unspoken understanding that instinct and obedience were as vital as the knowledge of signals and symbols. A gentle tug of the rein, a slight shift of weight, a soft murmur of reassurance. These became the bridge across which information passed. as effectively as any scribe's quill or knight's whisper ravens wheeled overhead, black silhouettes against the pale light, their cries carrying like warnings through the empty spaces between battlements, observers of both human and animal. Their presence seemed to measure the tension below, chronicling the choreography of survival without interference. Indifferent but ever-present, their shadowed forms flitted across walls and ground, ephemeral messengers to a world layered with secrets, where every observer could be a witness, every gesture a signal, every pause a test of awareness. The stables, tucked behind the ramparts, exhaled their own rhythm. Straw, iron, and sweat formed a fragrant, pungent tapestry of labor and devotion. Hooves scraped against stone, leather creaked under the pull of harnesses, bells tinkled softly with movement, each sound a note in the larger symphony of preparation. The scent of damp hay mingled with smoke drifting from distant hearths, grounding the secretive codes in the tangible reality of medieval life, the tactile world of horseflesh, leather, straps, and iron fittings was inseparable from the intangible network of gestures and symbols that guided knights through uncertainty and danger. As sunlight began to gleam off polished steel, the interplay between humans and animals became visible. In fleeting glints and shadows, every movement created a ripple through the intricate web of silent commands. A step, a tilt, a glance. The yard itself seemed alive with intention, a space where every participant, seen or unseen, was attuned to the subtle currents of trust, obedience, and vigilance. In these quiet rhythms, the survival of men, the readiness of armies, and the preservation of kingdoms were all encoded, a living testament to the power of knowledge hidden in plain sight. Training exercises, sparring drills, and mounted maneuvers unfolded like chapters of an unwritten book. Each encounter, each parried strike, each controlled feint conveyed instruction and intelligence. Simultaneously, mist lifted slowly from the yard, revealing the precise alignment of banners, the careful spacing of knights, the tension held in bridled horses, and the silent signaling of scribes recording the fleeting, ephemeral lessons of the morning. Knowledge and instinct intertwined, forming a latticework that governed more than combat-shaped strategy, loyalty, and the very fabric of medieval survival. As the morning stretched on, the language of steel and shadow extended beyond the courtyard, touching stables, ramparts, and the fields beyond. Knights moved with purpose, horses responded with instinct, banners flickered in coded motion, and scribes documented each nuance. It was a network that bridged man and beast, symbol and movement, intuition and discipline, binding a fragile order upon which the chaos of war might otherwise descend unchecked. The silent code was a lifeline, an unseen armor protecting both the living and the legacy of those trained to wield it. By mid-morning, the mist had thinned, but the invisible currents of communication remained: the clatter of armor, the scrape of sharpened blades, the soft jingling of bells, and the rhythmic stamping of hooves created a continuous dialogue. Shadows lengthened across walls and courtyards, mirroring the precise choreography below, as if the very light were participating in the hidden language in this intricate web. Trust was currency, comprehension was survival, and mastery of gesture and symbol could determine the fate of men and the kingdoms they served. And as the sun rose higher, The network of silent understanding stretched outward, reaching into valleys, forests, and villages that depended upon knowledge invisible to outsiders. The hidden code governed more than drills. It governed the flow of information, the rhythm of preparation, and the survival of all who moved within its unseen lattice in the delicate interplay of human and animal, shadow and steel, gesture and symbol. Kingdoms endured, warriors were armed with wisdom beyond the edge of their swords, and life itself persisted under the quiet guidance of the unseen currents that defined medieval warfare and existence. Frost lay thick upon the cobblestones, turning the courtyard into a field of brittle crystal that cracked beneath armored boots. The morning air was sharp, biting at exposed skin, carrying the mingled scents of damp wool, leather polished by routine, and the cold temps of iron smoke from distant hearths curled lazily through the mist, entwining with the faint odors of horse sweat and straw. A testament to both labor and vigilance, each sound, each scent, became a part of the unspoken language that bound the knights, horses, and attendants into a living mechanism of preparedness. The march began with a measured rhythm, armored feet striking stone in deliberate cadence. To the untrained ear, it was merely the sound of men moving, but to those who had learned the hidden lexicon of combat, it was a symphony of communication. Every tilt of a shield, every subtle nod of a helm, each flick of a gauntlet spoke volumes, warnings of danger, orders to adjust formation, reassurances that the web of coordination held firm. Even the impatient stamping of horses, nostrils flaring and breath steaming, was interpreted within this network, an acknowledgement that the creatures themselves were participants in a silent code of vigilance and survival along the edges of the yard. Dogs moved with precision, paws silent on frost-hardened stone, their ears pricked at distant sounds, eyes tracking shadows invisible to most, bodies poised to respond instantly. These animals were not mere companions. They were extensions of the knight's senses, bridges between human perception and the hidden threats that might stalk the encampment. Their soft growls or sudden movements punctuated the silent dialogue, adding an instinctive intelligence that number scribe could replicate on parchment tin. The dim recesses, scribes hunched over scrolls, quills scratching into parchment bound with wax and silk. They captured patterns of motion, the subtle choreography of shields, banners, and gauntlets, preserving a language of strategy that could tip the scales of battle. Each notation was a key to understanding the invisible, an attempt to codify what could otherwise only be learned through sweat, repetition, and peril. Symbols etched into armor, embroidered upon tunics, or painted on banners, carried layered meanings to the initiated. A single curve or line could signal loyalty, a hidden order, or an imminent maneuver, while to outsiders it was mere ornamentation, a deception woven into the visual fabric of the yard. The clang of distant metal, the soft jingle of bells on collars and harnesses, and the low neighing of restless horses blended into a layered rhythm, synchronizing man and beast into a unified organism. The courtyard itself became a stage upon which the silent symphony unfolded, a network of gestures and glances, pauses and shifts, each element resonating across stone and frost. Ravens wheeled overhead, their cries slicing through the cold air, silent witnesses to the invisible currents, observers of the intricate interplay between knights, animals, and symbols that guided action beyond spoken words. Long shadows stretched across the courtyard, elongating the forms of armored figures, banners, and steeds into shapes that seemed to dance upon the frost. Each shadow echoed a hidden command, a subtle cue in the grand choreography that held armies. Together, the air vibrated with an almost imperceptible tension, a recognition that life, honor, and the very fate of men were intertwined with the mastery of these silent codes. A misread gesture could spell disaster. A well-timed signal could shift the outcome of an engagement before steel ever clashed horses. Shifting beneath the weight of their riders, mirrored the subtle tension in their human counterparts, their flaring nostrils, pricked ears, and restless hooves were an integral part of the language, a living barometer of caution and readiness. The bond between knight and steed transcended training. It was an instinctive understanding forged through countless mornings like this one, where precision, patience, and mutual trust were tested against cold, fatigue, and anticipation of unseen threats. The courtyard's rhythm pulsed outward, touching every corner of the encampment. Servants and squires moved with quiet purpose, adjusting straps, checking equipment, and observing the hidden grammar of gestures. Bells tinkled softly with each adjustment, the sound barely perceptible, yet integral to the orchestration of preparation. The mist that clung to stone walls and stables seemed to absorb and reflect the silent communications, thickening the sense that the entire world, from rampart to riverbank, had been drawn into a shared vigilance. In the corners, where light and shadow met, scribes continued to capture the ephemeral language. Each tilt of a helm, flick of a gauntlet, and shift of a banner was recorded not just as instruction, but as a living memory, a strategy etched into permanence. The symbols carried weight beyond mere visual communication. They were vessels of allegiance, warnings, and secret knowledge that could only be fully understood by those trained in the discipline of observation and intuition. By mid-morning, the courtyard had fully awakened. Mist lingered only in pockets, curling around stone and timber, while sunlight glinted off steel and leather. Yet the silent language persisted. Invisible yet omnipresent shadows stretched across frozen stone, aligning with banners and helms as if light itself participated in the code. The network of communication, the synergy between knights, horses, dogs, and symbols remained unbroken, a lattice of trust and precision that shielded life and preserved honor in a world governed by chaos and chances. The first exercises concluded, and the clang of swords faded to softer echoes. The silent currents of understanding extended beyond the courtyard. They flowed into stables, down cobbled streets, and across frost-bitten fields, connecting men and animals, banners and battlements, into a single organism poised for survival. Each participant, whether human or beast, contributed to a living web of strategy and vigilance, a testament to the unseen codes that dictated the rhythm of medieval life and warfare. And so, as the sun climbed higher and the frost began to recede under its pale light, the invisible language of knights stretched onward, carrying with it the trust, cunning, and discipline necessary to navigate a world where every gesture could decide the boundary between life and death. In this hidden symphony, kingdoms endured, warriors thrived, and the unspoken code wove an enduring thread through the fragile tapestry of medieval existence. Morning mist clung to the stone walls, curling around battlements and archways, thick with the scent of damp earth, leather polished by routine, and the cold tang of iron. The air trembled with anticipation, carrying the soft clatter of armored knights moving in precise formation, each gesture raising a shield, shifting a banner. The subtle step of a boot spoke to those trained in the arcane grammar of war. A silent dialogue, invisible to the uninitiated, every motion contained meaning. A warning, an instruction, a reassurance, threaded into a fabric of vigilance that extended from rampart to stable horses pawed at frost-covered stone, nostrils flaring with visible clouds of breath, their muscles tensed, ears swiveling at distant sounds, reflecting the nervous energy of their riders. Each steed mirrored the anticipation that hummed in the armor of its master, the fragile bond of trust and understanding between man and animal, as essential as any weapon. Dogs moved like shadows along the edges of courtyards, noses to the ground, ears pricked at imperceptible signals, their silence and obedience forming a crucial conduit for messages, warnings, and vigilance. These creatures, instinctive and loyal, threaded through the unfolding choreography, bridging gaps between humans and the perilous world beyond the walls and shadowed alcoves. Scribes hunched over leather-bound scrolls, quills scratching faintly as they captured gestures, angles, and shifts. They recorded the language of the yard, the subtle tilt of a shield, the flick of a gauntlet, the measured sway of a banner, ensuring that knowledge, ephemeral in motion, became enduring and codified. Each mark preserved strategies that could mean life or death, the survival of a squadron, or the fate of a battalion. Symbols etched upon shields, helms, and banners carried layered meaning, warnings, secret orders, pledges of loyalty, and hidden allegiance, visible only to those who had been taught the silent syntax of combat, the clang of steel as swords were adjusted, the scraping of boots across frost-hardened stone, and the low, impatient neigh of horses blended into a layered rhythm. Bells on collars and harnesses jingled softly with each movement, subtle punctuation in a complex symphony of clandestine communication. Even the rustle of banners in the wind added cadence, marking changes in formation, drawing eyes to unseen signals. Ravens wheeled overhead, black against the pale sky, their cries echoing off stone and mortar, observers to the intricate ballet below, witnesses to the web of secrecy that held the courtyard in tense equilibrium. Every knight moved with a dual consciousness, aware of both the visible world and the invisible lexicon in which they participated. A shield lifted at a particular angle, a careful step forward, the slightest nod of the helm. These were words in a language that required years of practice to read fluently. Horses, taught to respond to nuance and patience, reacted in kind. Their subtle shifts, the flick of a tail, the tense curl of a neck, spoke back in quiet affirmation, completing a dialogue that transcended human speech. Together, man and beast wove a network of trust, vigilance, and unspoken understanding that extended across the courtyard, linking each participant into a living organism of readiness and strategy. Outside the immediate courtyard, the web of communication extended further. Servants and squires observed from doorways and stairways, adjusting straps and equipment, aware of the silent grammar unfolding before them. Even the smallest gesture, positioning a bridle, tightening a harness, was integrated into the overall rhythm, contributing to the stability of the system. Bells and harnesses, Quills and ink, steel, and stonal participated in a covert orchestra, each element synchronized with the others. Invisible to outsiders, yet vital to survival, sunlight began to pierce the mist, scattering across frost-coated cobbles and glinting on polished armor. Shadows stretched long, exaggerating the angles of banners, the contours of helms, the silhouettes of mounted knights. These elongated forms became carriers of meaning themselves, additional layers in a complex web of gestures, signals, and coded understanding. Every shadow, every shimmer of light on steel contributed to the silent conversation, reinforcing the connections between individuals, animals, and symbols. Yard, once shrouded in gray mist, now shimmered with light and frost. Yet the language of the knights remained invisible, persistent. Alive movements continued with measured precision, each a word in a narrative that safeguarded life and honor. The connection between man, beast, and symbol was a fragile yet resilient network, its coherence dependent upon trust, instinct, and disciplined observation. A misread gesture could ripple into disaster. A perfectly executed signal could change the course of a skirmish. Before a sword was drawn, ravens wheeled overhead, their cries slicing through the air, a constant reminder that this silent symphony was not unseen. Observers, both human and animal, monitored, absorbed, and sometimes intervened. The interplay of motion, sound, and shadow carried lessons far beyond the courtyard, preparing those who moved within it for the uncertainty, danger, and strategy that awaited beyond the walls. Each step, tilt, and flick was a rehearsal for chaos, a practice of endurance, cunning, and survival. As mid-morning approached, the clatter softened, replaced by the subtle hum of readiness. Horses shifted, nostrils flaring less sharply as they settled. Dogs paused in attentive silence, and scribes continued to trace the invisible language in delicate ink. The courtyard exhaled, yet the currents of communication persisted, extending outward, binding men and animals, banners and battlements into a single organism attuned to the exigencies of life and death. And so, as the frost began to recede under the strengthening sun, the hidden language of knights stretched beyond the courtyard, an enduring lattice of gestures, glances, and symbols. Life, honor, and strategy rested upon its threads, connecting warriors and beasts in a network that sustained kingdoms, preserved secrecy, and ensured that even in the chaos of medieval warfare, order and understanding could emerge from the silent symphony of dawn. A cold wind swept across the frost-laden training grounds, carrying the mingling scents of damp hay, polished leather, and cold iron. Each breath seemed to hum with anticipation as armored knights adjusted gauntlets and bridles, their movements deliberate, rehearsed, ritualistic. The faint scrape of leather against steel, the subtle shifting of weight, the angle of a helm or tilt of a shield were words in a language spoken without sound, understood by only those initiated in the secret art of war. Each gesture guided not just men, but the animals they relied upon, weaving trust, obedience, and instinct into a delicate network of survival. Horses shifted uneasily beneath their riders, stamping and whinnying, their breath rising in misty plumes, echoing the tension that coursed through the human ranks. Every flick of an ear, every flex of a hoof, mirrored the unspoken anticipation of battle and the fragile balance of control. The animals, as aware as their masters, responded with precision to the slightest cue, their movements integrated into a silent choreography that had been honed through countless Don's dogs padded along the edges of the yard. Paws muffled by frost-hardened earth, ears flicking toward distant sounds, they were watchers and messengers, conduits of unseen communication, bridging gaps between men and beasts, alert to threats invisible to the untrained, iron-shadowed alcoves. Scribes hunched over leather-bound scrolls, quills scratching as they traced the intricate sequences of motion, the rise and fall of a shield, the pivot of a boot, the subtle sway of a banner. Each mark preserved the hidden lexicon of the training yard, a knowledge that could tilt the balance of life and death. Symbols etched into shields, banners, and crests carried layers of meaning, allegiance, warning, and instruction to outsiders. They were mere decoration. To the initiated, they were commands, prayers, and promises, a silent covenant binding men to each other, to their horses, and to the fragile order of their world. The air was alive with layered sound, the distant clang of steel striking steel, the soft jingle of harness bells, the rhythmic stamping of hooves on frost-crusted stone. Each element contributed to a chorus of secrecy, a living music of coordination, trust, and vigilance. Ravens wheeled overhead, black shadows against pale dawn, their cries punctuating the subtle dialogue below. They were witnesses to the ballet, observers of a language that could determine the fate of a skirmish, a raid, or the survival of an entire battalion. Every knight moved with dual consciousness, aware of the outward world and the invisible codes weaving through each step and gesture. A tap of a gauntlet, the lift of a shield, a carefully timed shift in stances were words in a lexicon that few could interpret. Horses mirrored these signals in their own nuanced responses. A tense neck, a flick of a tail, a gentle shift in footing, completing a dialogue that transcended human speech. Together, man and beast created a lattice of trust and precision, each movement rippling through the yard, connecting individuals into a single organism of readiness and survival. The courtyard itself seemed to participate. Frost on cobblestones caught the light, casting long, fractured shadows that mirrored the angles of shields and the arcs of banners. Even sunlight became a carrier of meaning, highlighting cues and gestures for those trained to see them. The interplay of light, shadow, and motion transformed the yard into a canvas of communication, where each element, man, beast, banner, and stone, was a symbol in the silent narrative of strategy. Beyond the immediate training space, the rhythms extended outward. Squires and servants adjusted straps, prepared weapons, and observed with careful attention, integrating their actions into the larger flow. Each task, each adjustment, contributed to the overall choreography, ensuring that the web of signals remained intact. The bells and harnesses, quills and ink, swords and stone all participated in a synchronized symphony, invisible to the uninitiated, yet vital to the preservation of life, honor, and order. As the sun climbed higher, frost glinted along armor, banners, and stone, illuminating the hidden networks that linked knights, horses, dogs, and heraldic symbols. Movements continued with deliberate precision, each a word, a sentence, a paragraph in a language of survival. The quiet mastery of the yard, perfected over seasons of dawns and nights, ensured that even amidst the uncertainty of war, coordination and strategy remained intact. Misread signals could lead to catastrophe, Flawless execution could shift the tide of battle. Every subtle shift, every glance, every measured motion carried consequence. Ravens continued their silent surveillance, their cries echoing against stone, marking time in the morning ritual. Men and animals alike moved with acute awareness, an understanding born of discipline, trust, and instinct. The courtyard exhaled with the rhythm of the drills. Yet beneath the apparent calm flowed currents of tension, preparedness, and vigilance, a living testament to the delicate balance of medieval life. By mid-morning, the clang of steel softened, replaced by a hum of readiness. Horses shifted less anxiously, dogs paused in attentive silence, and scribes continued to commit the invisible lexicon to ink and parchment. Yet the language persisted, stretching beyond the walls, linking man, beast, and emblem into a living, breathing organism of strategy, secrecy, and survival. The silent ballet of the morning ensured that even in chaos there existed an order, a rhythm, a mastery that could preserve life, honor, and the fragile threads upon which medieval kingdoms depended. As sunlight glimmered across frost-sparkled stone and polished armor, the hidden communication of the yard reached beyond sight. Man, horse, dog, and banner formed a lattice of trust, vigilance, and subtle power. This intricate network, invisible yet unbroken, promised that even in the uncertainty of war, knowledge, discipline, and the quiet mastery of the trained eye could guide the fate of lives, the loyalty of men, and the destinies of kingdoms poised on the edge of dawn. Fog clung to the courtyards of the castle like a living veil, curling along frost-covered stones, muffling sound, and carrying the mingling scents of wet earth, smoke from distant hearths, cold iron, and worn leather. The chill seeped through layers of chainmail and wool, settling deep into the bones of knights who moved with deliberate precision. Every tilt of a shield, the subtle sway of a banner, the lift of a gauntlet, spoke in a language spoken by few, a silent code that conveyed orders, warnings, and loyalties. Without a single word, the air itself seemed to hum with tension, a quiet anticipation that threaded through men and animals alike, binding them to the fragile rhythms of medieval survival. Horses pawed at frost-crusted cobbles, nostrils flaring in misty plumes, their muscles taut beneath armored riders. Each exhalation rose like smoke, merging with the morning fog, echoing the silent urgency of drills that could decide life or death on distant fields. Dogs moved like shadows along walls and narrow corridors, paws silent against stone, ears pricked to catch every subtle sound, eyes sharp in the dim light. They were watchers and messengers, mediators between man and beast, guardians of the unspoken code that sustained order in the castle. A low jingle from a collar, the subtle thump of a paw, became a signal in itself, a word in the invisible lexicon that linked every being within the castle's walls. In shadowed alcoves, scribes hunched over leather-bound scrolls, quills scratching against parchment as they traced movements and gestures with exacting care. The rise of a shield, a measured step, the precise angle of a helm, each recorded detail, preserved the fragile knowledge that could determine the outcome of battle. Symbols etched into armor, banners, and crests were not decoration but carriers of meaning, layered and complex. They marked allegiance, whispered caution, and encoded strategy, visible only to those trained to read the language of trust, discipline, and survival, the courtyard itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of this silent communication, the clang of steel against stone, the soft rustle of leather, the muted clink of chains. The rhythmic stamping of hooves all fused into a living symphony of vigilance, each sound and motion layered upon the next, creating a network of signals that spread through knights, horses, and dogs alike. A subtle choreography, invisible to the uninitiated, yet crucial to maintaining the delicate balance of power and preparedness. Ravens wheeled overhead, black silhouettes against the pale light, their harsh cries punctuating the ritual. Witnesses to the invisible conversation unfolding below, every knight moved with the dual consciousness of warrior and linguist, aware of the outward drills and the hidden meanings embedded in each gesture, a tap of a gauntlet, the pivot of a foot, a tilt of a shield. These were sentences, paragraphs, entire arguments in the silent dialect that governed loyalty, strategy, and survival. Horses mirrored these cues in muscular responses. A shift of weight, a flick of an ear, a tense lift of the neck, responding instinctively to human signals while conveying subtle alerts of their own dogs, ever alert, wove between ranks, carrying messages in motion and presence, ensuring that the silent lexicon extended to every corner of the courtyard. Sunlight glinted off frost-covered stones and polished armor. Shadows stretched long and fractured across the courtyard, tracing the angles of shields, banners, and the lean, disciplined forms of knight's light became part of the language, highlighting cues, emphasizing gestures, guiding the observant eye. Every element, the man, the beast, the banner, the stone, played its role in a complex network where a misread movement could cost lives and flawless execution could preserve kingdoms. The courtyard was alive, a canvas of communication, a living organism sustained by vigilance, trust, and the precision of its participants beyond the immediate confines of the training yard. The rhythm extended outward. Squires adjusted straps, servants carried weapons, and observers moved in careful synchronization, each action reinforcing the hidden ballet of signals. Bells on collars jingled softly with each step. The scrape of a boot on stone added to the cadence, and the distant neigh of horses underscored the urgency of practice. The entire castle participated in the silent symphony, its walls, towers, and courtyards resonating with the invisible dialogue that ensured order, preserved life, and guarded the secrets of survival. The hidden language of dawn was more than a tool of war. It was a testament to the meticulous discipline of a world built on uncertainty, trust, and cunning. Each movement, each glance, each gesture stretched beyond the courtyard, linking man, beast, and banner into a lattice of vigilance and understanding. It was a knowledge that required patience to learn, instinct to interpret, and unwavering attention to execute. The network, delicate yet unbreakable, bound the castle together in a web of strategy that could safeguard honor, lives, and the fortunes of kingdoms. Teetering on the edge of chaos as the morning light strengthened, frost sparkled along stone and steel, revealing the intricate patterns of interaction between knights, animals, and symbols. The silent communication persisted, invisible yet omnipresent, a quiet mastery honed through dawns spent in shadow. And disciplined ravens continued their aerial vigil, observing the subtle ballet, marking time with their cries, witnesses to the careful order that existed beneath apparent chaos, the hidden language threaded through every gesture, every breath, every motion, ensuring that even in the uncertainty of war, knowledge, loyalty, and vigilance would prevail in this delicate interplay of light, shadow, and motion. The castle breathed as one organism. Men, horses, and dogs moved in concert, a lattice of trust, instinct, and strategy. Symbols etched into armor, banners, and crests carried weight beyond mere representation, communicating allegiance, instruction, and warning to those who understood the courtyard, now fully illuminated, revealed not just a place of training, but a living testament to the quiet mastery that defined medieval life. Every silent gesture preserved strategy, every motion safeguarded life, and every attentive eye ensured that the fragile currents of trust and survival remained unbroken. As fog lifted and sunlight spilled across cobbled stones, the invisible threads of communication stretched beyond sight, linking warriors, animals, and emblems into a network of resilience. The hidden language of dawn had spoken, its silent narrative etched into every movement and every glance, a subtle yet profound testament to the discipline, cunning, and endurance that preserved life, honor, and the delicate fortunes of kingdoms poised on the cusp of war. A thin veil of mist clung to the castle courtyard, curling along frost-laden stones and entwining itself around armored figures. Moving with measured precision, the air was cold, carrying the mingled scent of iron, leather, smoke, and wet straw, pierced by the sharp, steaming breath of horses pawing at the frozen ground. Every exhalation rose into the fog, a ghostly echo of the anticipation and tension that hummed between men, animals, and the stones that bore their weight. The courtyard seemed suspended, a fragile world poised between dawn and the demands of duty, where every gesture spoke volumes in a language understood only by those initiated in its silent rules. Shifted their weight, the tilt of a shield, the flick of a gauntlet, the nuanced angle of a banner. All gestures weighted with meaning, each a carefully chosen word in an invisible lexicon of loyalty, warning, and strategy. Horses mirrored these cues instinctively, ears flicking, muscles coiled, hooves stamping a rhythmic counterpoint to the measured drills of their riders. Dogs moved like shadows, slipping between ranks and along walls, silent sentinels whose alertness was integral to the network of communication threading through courtyard and battlement. A jingle of a collar, a subtle paw step, a sudden lift of the heddle became messages in this living system, interpreted instinctively by those who had learned its code. In shadowed alcoves, scribes hunched over parchment, quills tracing the delicate arcs and angles of each movement. They recorded the choreography with painstaking care, the rise of a shield, the turn of a helm, the shift of a banner in the wind. Every nuance mattered, for one misinterpreted gesture could mean disaster on the battlefield, and every mark etched into armor, crest, or banner carried layers of meaning invisible to untrained eyes. Loyalty, caution, allegiance, and command were all encoded in symbols, a silent language that preserved strategy, safeguarded honor, and anchored the fragile trust upon which lives depended. The courtyard itself became a living symphony of secrecy, the clatter of steel against stone, the soft rustle of leather, the muted jingle of harness bells, the rhythmic stamping of hoofsall, combined into a layered cadence that harmonized men, horses, and dogs into a single organism. Each sound, each pause, each motion contributed to the delicate balance of readiness, a network where discipline and instinct intertwined above. Ravens wheeled, black silhouettes tracing the pale light, their cries punctuating the silent exchanges below, silent witnesses to the unseen order that kept the castle and its inhabitants aligned. The sun broke slowly over frost-covered battlements, glinting across polished steel and frozen cobbles. Shadows stretched long, intertwining with the movements of men and animals, revealing the patterns of interaction that had been invisible in the mist. Every tilt of a shield, every angled helm, every careful step was part of a silent conversation, a complex dialogue where even the smallest gesture could carry warning, instruction, or reassurance. Horses shifted in sync. Dogs moved between ranks with purpose, and banners caught the wind, all forming a lattice of trust and vigilance that extended across courtyard and rampart, alike beyond the immediate training yard. The signals carried further. Squires and attendants adjusted equipment, maintained harnesses, and transported weapons, each action calibrated to reinforce the larger system of silent communication. The rhythm of life in the castle was continuous, a delicate choreography sustained by the discipline of its participants, the obedience of animals, and the sharp eyes of those who could read the hidden code. Every participant, from knight to dog to scribe, was a node in this living network, their actions resonating with consequences far beyond the courtyard walls. The hidden language of the castle was more than preparation for battle. It was a testament to the meticulous discipline required to survive in a world governed by strategy, loyalty, and the ever-present specter of danger. Each gesture, glance, and motion connected the participants in a lattice of instinct, trust, and understanding. One misread sign could topple an entire formation. One missed rhythm could cost life or honor, and yet, when executed with precision, the silent ballet preserved kingdoms, maintained alliances, and ensured that those sworn to defend could act with certainty. Even in the chaos of war, ravens continued their surveillance, slicing through the morning light, their cries a counterpoint to the quiet orchestration below. Horses stamped and shifted beneath armored riders, their breath rising in ghostly clouds, while dogs threaded between men like living threads in a vast tapestry of intent. Every gesture, sound, and motion was interdependent, forming an invisible lattice that guided, protected, and connected. Symbols etched into armor, banners, and shields carried meaning deeper than ink or metal, resonating through minds trained to interpret their layered messages. This was a language beyond words, one of trust, discipline, and cunning, a mastery honed by countless dawns spent in frost, shadow, and quiet vigilance. As sunlight strengthened, frost sparkled across stones, steel, and banners, revealing the full architecture of communication. The courtyard pulsed with the quiet energy of coordination. Every step, tilt, and jingle, a vital element in a network of survival. Men, horses, and dogs moved as one organism, each attuned to the others, each sustaining the fragile web that safeguarded strategy, honor, and life itself. The hidden language of dawn, practiced and refined, ensured that even when the fog lifted and the battlefield lay beyond sight, the castle remained a bastion of order, vigilance, and silent mastery. In the interplay of light, shadow, and movement, the courtyard became a testament to discipline and trust. Every silent gesture, Every attentive gaze, every instinctive response wove the delicate threads of a network capable of preserving life, guiding action, and maintaining the delicate fortunes of kingdoms on the edge of conflict. As the mist dissolved under the morning sun, the hidden ballet of knights, animals, and symbols endured, a silent narrative of loyalty, cunning, and survival that stretched beyond sight, binding the castle in an invisible web that would govern the fate of all who dwelled within.